Dr. Elise Johnson, a top trauma surgeon from New York, finally had a rare moment to breathe as she settled into her class seat. This flight to Miami wasn't just a vacation, it was a hard-earned escape from the unrelenting demands of the operating room. But as the plane prepared for takeoff, Elise sensed that this trip might bring more than the relaxation she hoped for. Her journey, marked by resilience and hard-won success, was about to take an unexpected turn. Sometimes, it's not just the destination that matters, but the people you meet along the way, and the lessons they learn. Before we dive into this heartfelt story, let us know where you're watching from. Love powerful and meaningful stories like this? Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you won't miss any of our videos. Dr. Elise Johnson, one of the sharpest minds in modern medicine, had finally gotten a break she had desperately needed. This particular flight was supposed to be her escape, a rare moment of peace, a break from her intense work life. She had been working grueling shifts in New York City's busiest trauma hospital, and tonight, as she slipped into her first-class seat, she felt a small wave of relief. Elise adjusted her crisp white blouse and casually tucked her stethoscope deeper into her leather carry-on, trying to downplay the fact that she was a doctor. The lights in the cabin dimmed, and the quiet hum of the airplane engine began to calm her. Looking out the window, she saw the New York City lights slowly disappearing into the night as the plane taxied. She was leaving behind endless hours in the operating room, her patience and the unrelenting demands of her position as one of the top trauma surgeons at the Metropolitan Medical Center. Despite her accomplishments, a hint of discomfort clung to her as she settled into her seat. The luxurious environment around her, soft leather seats, polished cabin interiors, and the relaxed whispers of first-class passengers felt almost foreign. Growing up in the Bronx, she had never expected to find herself in places like this. Elise's mother, a teacher, and her father, a construction worker, had worked tirelessly to give her a chance to chase her dreams. She'd fought her way to success, facing every challenge head-on, and even now, that humble background remained close to her heart. At 34, Elise had already achieved more than most would in a lifetime, yet every step of her journey had been filled with obstacles, including skepticism and prejudice. Her path to becoming a top trauma surgeon was marked by constant challenges, with others doubting her abilities simply because of who she was. She'd faced countless side glances, subtle remarks, and quiet assumptions that she wasn't good enough. Even her spot in first class tonight felt questioned. She caught a few curious glances from nearby passengers who seemed to wonder if she belonged there. As the plane began to ascend, Elise's mind drifted to her patients back at the hospital. It was hard for her to relax fully, thinking about the people she'd left in her colleagues' care, a young man recovering from a car accident, and a woman who'd survived severe burns. She couldn't help but worry, feeling as though her place was with them, even if her coworkers had practically pushed her onto this plane to get some rest. For a few precious moments, she tried to enjoy the peace she had earned. Elise thought back to the long nights in med school and the years she spent perfecting her skills in residency. It had been a grueling path, but she had pushed forward with determination, breaking down every barrier that stood in her way. She knew she had earned this brief break from the relentless grind. Then she noticed a middle-aged man a few seats away from her. He was struggling to shove his oversized carry-on bag into the overhead compartment. Dressed in an expensive but slightly outdated suit, his face was red with irritation. Watching his frustrated struggle, Elise couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. She leaned forward and offered a polite smile. "Need some help with that?" she asked, her tone genuinely friendly. The man barely glanced at her and dismissed her with a wave of his hand. "No, I've got it," he snapped, his voice laced with annoyance. Elise's smile faltered for a second, but she quickly regained her composure. She'd encountered men like this before, men who dismissed her without a second thought, often because of her gender, the color of her skin, or both. She knew he probably had no idea who she was or what she had achieved. People often underestimated her, assuming she didn't belong, but Elise had learned to let it roll off her shoulders. As she watched him struggle, a flight attendant approached to inform him that the bag was too large for the overhead bin. His frustration only grew, and he grumbled loudly, making a scene about how he had never had an issue before. Finally, he handed over the bag with a huff and slumped into the seat beside Elise. He muttered to himself about how first-class service wasn't what it used to be, loudly enough for her to hear. Elise chose to stay silent, keeping her gaze forward. She wasn't about to let a minor inconvenience ruin her flight, though she could sense this wasn't the last she'd hear from him. Bookmark. As the man settled beside her, Elise felt his glances. She knew he was sizing her up, likely wondering if she belonged in first class. It wasn't the first time she'd dealt with this, those quiet judgments, the subtle looks that questioned her presence in spaces like this. The man seemed determined to make his disapproval known, shifting and sighing audibly as if to invite her attention. Finally, he looked her way, his eyes narrowing with an unmistakable mix of surprise and suspicion. "First class, huh?" he said, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "What are you, some kind of consultant?" Elise met his gaze calmly. She'd heard this tone countless times, skepticism wrapped in a forced politeness. He probably assumed her success was a lucky break or that she had connections to thank, rather than her own hard work. Taking a deep breath, Elise replied, her voice measured and steady, "I'm a trauma surgeon, Dr. Elise Johnson." For a second, the man's expression faltered, his eyes widening ever so slightly as he processed her response. But then he recovered, a thin smile creeping onto his face. "A surgeon, huh? Impressive for someone your age," he remarked, with just enough sarcasm to make it feel less like a compliment and more like a challenge. Elise felt her jaw tighten, but she refused to let his comment shake her. It was nothing new. People had been belittling her achievements for as long as she could remember. She responded evenly, "Yes, I've been practicing for nearly 10 years, actually. I completed my residency at Metropolitan Medical here in New York." The man, who had introduced himself as Trevor Whitman, gave a dismissive chuckle. "Must be nice, taking a little vacation in Miami," he said, leaning back and crossing his arms. "I remember when I was starting out, I could barely afford a weekend trip." Elise recognized the jab, as subtle as it was meant to be. She kept her voice calm. "I saved for this trip. Self-care is essential when you're working in high-stress environments." Trevor scoffed. "Self-care, that's what they're calling it now?" His sarcasm was clear. Elise felt her patience thinning, but she knew this was a test she'd faced countless times. She reminded herself that she didn't owe this man an explanation. Her achievements spoke for themselves, and she had nothing to prove to him or anyone else. But Trevor seemed determined to push her, his gaze lingering as he assessed her. He clearly wasn't just uncomfortable with her presence in first class. It seemed the idea of a black woman sitting next to him in a seat he likely thought was reserved for people like himself was something he couldn't wrap his head around. His offhand remarks carried a weight, the loaded implication that she didn't belong. Yet Elise remained composed. She answered his questions politely, giving brief responses that were firm but not defensive. This was a game she'd learned to play over the years, a balancing act of keeping her composure while asserting her worth. She let his comments roll off her, knowing that responding to them would only add fuel to his prejudice. The tension between them was almost tangible, and Elise knew that Trevor was growing frustrated by her refusal to engage with his thinly veiled insults. For him, this was likely an unfamiliar experience, being met with calm resilience instead of the reactions he expected. But Elise wasn't about to let him disturb the peace she had fought so hard to achieve on this rare break. As the flight continued, Trevor shifted restlessly in his seat, his discomfort almost palpable. Elise kept her eyes forward, choosing to focus on the book she had brought along. She reminded herself of the reason she was here, to finally take a breather from her demanding job, to enjoy some time for herself, no matter who was sitting next to her. But just as she began to settle into a quiet rhythm, a sudden commotion erupted from a few rows ahead. Elise's attention snapped up, and she noticed a man clutching his chest, his face contorted in pain. He let out a strangled gasp, and in seconds, his head slumped forward, his hand gripping his chest tightly. The murmur spread rapidly through the cabin as passengers nearby stood up, panic flashing in their eyes as they tried to make sense of what was happening. Elise's instincts took over immediately. Without a second thought, she unbuckled her seatbelt and moved swiftly toward the scene. "I'm a doctor," she announced to the flight attendants, who were frantically pulling out the first aid kit. "I'm a trauma surgeon. Let me help." There was a brief pause, but the crew quickly recognized the authority in her voice and stepped aside. Elise knelt beside the man, her focus sharp and unwavering. She noted his labored breathing, the pale shade of his skin, and the beads of sweat on his forehead, signs she had seen far too many times. Elise's hands moved with the precision and steadiness of someone who had handled countless emergencies. Her voice remained calm as she addressed the flight attendant nearest her. "Do you have aspirin or nitroglycerin in the first aid kit?" she asked urgently. "We need to stabilize him until we can land and get proper medical care." The flight attendant fumbled through the kit and handed her the aspirin, and a nearby passenger, a nurse, quickly stepped forward to assist. Together, Elise and the nurse worked in seamless coordination, creating a makeshift emergency room right there in the cramped airplane aisle. Elise gave clear instructions to the flight attendants, and her years of experience guided her every move. Around them, the cabin fell silent. Passengers who had initially been murmuring in confusion now watched in stunned awe as Elise managed the situation with a calm authority that seemed to ease the tension throughout the cabin. Her confidence was contagious, and even the most anxious passengers found themselves feeling a strange sense of relief simply by watching her work. Meanwhile, Trevor sat frozen in his seat, his eyes wide as he watched Elise transform from the woman he'd dismissed just moments before into the one person capable of saving a life in the middle of this crisis. The arrogance and condescension he'd shown earlier were gone, replaced by an expression of shock and perhaps something deeper, a silent realization of his own ignorance. Elise remained focused, her mind fully absorbed in assessing the patient's condition. She instructed the nurse to monitor the man's pulse while she continued to assess his symptoms. This wasn't the first time she'd seen a heart attack mid-flight, and she knew how critical it was to act fast. Her years in trauma surgery had prepared her for moments just like this. Moments when life and death hung in the balance, and her actions could make all the difference. "Let's keep him comfortable," Elise said, her voice steady as she instructed the flight attendants on how to position him. "We're just keeping things stable until we land. Everyone, please stay calm." Her words carried a weight, a sense of command that left no room for doubt. After a tense few minutes, the man's breathing began to ease, his grip on his chest loosening. Elise carefully administered the aspirin, and she kept an eye on his vital signs as best she could under the circumstances. It wasn't a full recovery. No one could expect that on a flight miles above ground, but the worst of the symptoms seemed to subside. The passengers around her slowly began to exhale, some even offering quiet words of thanks and appreciation. Several flight attendants murmured their gratitude, and a few passengers who had witnessed the scene gave her nods of respect. Elise acknowledged them with a small, appreciative nod, though she was quick to return her focus to the patient. This was her job, her calling, to save lives, regardless of the circumstances. When the immediate danger passed and the man was stabilized, Elise finally allowed herself to stand up, her adrenaline still pumping, but her demeanor composed. As she walked back to her seat, the cabin erupted into a quiet round of applause, a spontaneous show of gratitude for the woman who had just brought a sense of calm and control to what had nearly been a disastrous situation. Elise offered a brief, modest smile, acknowledging their appreciation, but she quickly returned to her seat, not seeking attention or praise. For her, this was simply another day at work, even if the setting was different. She sat down, adjusting herself in her seat as she let her heartbeat slow, her thoughts gradually shifting away from the emergency. But as she settled back, she couldn't ignore the intense gaze coming from Trevor, who was still watching her with a look she couldn't quite place, somewhere between admiration and disbelief. The man who had so recently belittled her and questioned her place in first class was now rendered silent, his previous air of entitlement completely stripped away. Elise sensed the shift immediately. The arrogance had been replaced by something else, something vulnerable. Trevor shifted uncomfortably, clearly grappling with his own thoughts, and after a few moments he finally cleared his throat. "Elise," he began, his voice softer, almost fragile, I owe you an apology." She turned to him, her expression neutral but attentive. She waited, allowing his words to hang in the air, letting the weight of the moment sink in for him. Trevor's face was strained with discomfort as he stumbled through his words. "I was wrong. About you, about everything. I didn't think—" He hesitated, struggling to find the right words. "I didn't think someone like you would, be here." Elise's gaze didn't waver, her calm expression encouraging him to continue. Trevor took a shaky breath, clearly feeling the weight of his own words. "I didn't realize, I didn't know who you were. I just assumed." He trailed off, his discomfort evident as he wrestled with the rawness of the moment. Elise's gaze remained steady. She knew this was about more than just his apology. It was about the mindset that had led him to judge her in the first place. For a moment she considered simply brushing it off, accepting his words, and moving on. But a deeper part of her recognized the importance of this moment, not just for Trevor but for everyone like him, who might make similar assumptions without realizing the harm they caused. "It's not just about the apology, Trevor," Elise said, her voice firm yet calm. "It's about understanding why you made those assumptions. Why do you look at me and see someone who didn't belong here? Someone you thought you could dismiss? You didn't know anything about me, yet you decided who I was based on what I looked like, where I sat, or what you assumed about my life." Trevor winced slightly, his face tightening as the truth of her words struck him. He shifted in his seat, his usual confidence now absent as he listened, really listened, to what she was saying. For the first time he was being forced to confront the uncomfortable reality of his own biases, something he had likely never done before. I guess I just didn't see it that way," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I've never had to think about these things. I've always just assumed." He looked down, his face etched with an unfamiliar vulnerability. Elise nodded slowly, her expression softening just slightly. She could see that he was struggling, that he was grappling with something real, something significant. And though she knew change wouldn't happen overnight, she sensed that this was a moment he would remember. A moment that might just stay with him long after they left this plane. "It's not just you, Trevor," Elise continued, her tone gentle but unwavering. "It's the way society works, the way people are taught to view others who don't look like them or fit their expectations. People like me have to prove ourselves over and over again, to people who have already made up their minds about us before we even open our mouths. And that's not just exhausting, it's unfair." Trevor swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on his hands as he absorbed her words. He hadn't thought about it that way before. His entire life had been lived from a place of comfort, a place where people like him were assumed to belong in spaces like this. He'd never experienced the feeling of being seen as less than, of being reduced to a stereotype. And now, faced with Elise's calm but firm words, he felt the impact of that reality for the first time. I guess I didn't want to see it," he confessed softly, his voice filled with an unfamiliar humility. "It was easier to just assume, to keep things the way I thought they were. And now seeing what you did, seeing who you really are, I feel like an idiot." Elise's expression softened further. She could see that Trevor was genuine, that he was truly coming to terms with his own biases. It was a small victory, but one that felt significant. It was rare to see someone confront their own prejudices so openly, to acknowledge the harm they'd caused without defensiveness or excuses. "It's not enough to just apologize," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You have to change how you think, how you approach people. Not just me, everyone. Because if you don't, you'll keep making the same mistakes, and that doesn't help anyone, not you, not the people you dismiss, and certainly not the world we live in." Trevor nodded slowly, her words sinking in. He understood that this was about more than just his behavior on this flight. It was about the larger picture, about the way he'd been viewing the world all along. And though the realization was painful, he knew it was necessary. "I've got a lot to think about," he admitted, his voice filled with a kind of introspection that only comes after a deeply humbling experience. I'm not going to pretend I can change overnight, but I'll try. I'll really try. Elise offered him a small nod, her expression gentle. That's all anyone can ask, she replied. Change takes time, but it starts with recognizing the problem and being willing to do the work. For the remainder of the flight, the tension that had once filled the air between them dissipated, replaced by a quiet understanding. Trevor remained deep in thought, clearly lost in his own reflections, and Elise returned to her book, feeling a sense of resolution. She knew this moment had planted a seed of growth in him, a small but significant step toward unlearning the prejudices he had carried. As the plane continued its journey, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted. The other passengers, who had witnessed the life-saving moment and the quiet exchange between Elise and Trevor, seemed to sense the change as well. The judgmental glances that had been cast in her direction earlier were gone, replaced with an undeniable respect. As the plane continued its steady descent toward Miami, the cabin felt different. The whispers that had filled the rows during the emergency had quieted, and in their place, a sense of admiration lingered. Elise could feel the shift around her, the respect from her fellow passengers, the relief, and the quiet awe that had replaced the doubt she'd felt earlier. She settled back into her seat, feeling the residual adrenaline still thrumming faintly beneath her calm exterior. It had been an intense situation, one that reminded her why she'd chosen the path she had. But now, with the immediate crisis behind her, she finally allowed herself a moment of genuine peace. Trevor, still seated beside her, glanced over, clearly struggling to find the words he wanted to say. She could sense his discomfort. This was a man used to being in control, a man unaccustomed to questioning himself. Yet here he was, grappling with a realization that had likely never crossed his mind until today. Dr. Johnson, he began again, his voice more subdued, almost hesitant. I know I apologized, but I really just want to say thank you. Not just for what you did back there, but for making me see things a little differently. He paused, his gaze shifting to the window. I think I needed this. I just didn't know it. Elise regarded him thoughtfully, her expression softening. Sometimes we all need a little reminder, she said, her tone kind but direct. And the best reminders come when we're forced to see the world through someone else's eyes. Trevor nodded, letting her words settle over him. For the first time, he understood that his earlier assumptions about Elise, about who she was, about what he thought she represented, had been rooted not in reality, but in his own limited perspective. And now, that perspective had been cracked open, leaving room for something new, something better. The rest of the flight passed in reflective silence. Elise allowed herself to focus on her book, her mind finally drifting away from the tension that had filled the first part of the journey. She could still feel the occasional glances from passengers and flight attendants who now looked at her with newfound respect, but she paid them little mind. This was her time to recharge, to let herself breathe and reset after the chaos of the past few months. As the flight neared its end, the flight attendants came by to thank her once again. Dr. Johnson, we just want to express our gratitude, one of them said, a note of admiration clear in her voice. Your calm and expertise made all the difference. Thank you for what you did today. Elise nodded appreciatively. I'm just glad I could help, she replied simply, a modest smile on her face. She wasn't seeking recognition. This was simply her duty, the life she had chosen. Trevor, who had been listening quietly, seemed to absorb her humility, her unwavering sense of purpose. He shifted in his seat, clearly moved by the way she carried herself, as though finally understanding that the real strength she possessed wasn't just in her medical skills, but in her character, her resilience, and her grace under pressure. As the plane began its descent, the atmosphere between them felt lighter, the earlier tension replaced by a newfound understanding. Elise returned to her book, her mind at ease. She had come through yet another challenge, proving once again that she belonged here, not only as a skilled surgeon, but as a person who commanded respect in any setting. Trevor, meanwhile, remained deep in thought. This experience had left him with a lot to reflect on. He'd entered this flight with a narrow view of the world, but now, as he sat beside Elise, he felt his beliefs beginning to shift. He recognized the privilege he had taken for granted, and the assumptions he had made without realizing the impact they had on others. As the wheels touched down on the runway, Elise allowed herself a small, private smile. This trip had started as a chance to rest, to step away from the intensity of her work, and while it hadn't been the peaceful journey she'd envisioned, it had turned into something just as meaningful. Not only had she saved a life, but she had witnessed a shift, a small but significant change in a person who had needed it. The plane rolled to a stop at the gate, and the passengers began to gather their belongings, murmuring quietly about the events of the flight. Trevor, still beside her, glanced her way one last time. "Dr. Johnson, thank you," he said again, his voice softer, humbler than before. "I think I'll be a better person because of this, because of you." Elise offered him a gentle nod. "That's the goal, isn't it?" she replied with a faint smile. "To keep learning, to grow, and to treat people with the respect they deserve." Trevor nodded, his expression contemplative. For the first time he seemed genuinely moved, a man changed by an experience he hadn't expected. As the passengers began to file out, Elise and Trevor shared one final quiet look of understanding, a recognition that this moment, brief as it was, had made a lasting impact. As they made their way down the aisle and disembarked from the plane, Elise could sense a quiet ripple of acknowledgement from the passengers around her. Many nodded in gratitude, some murmured soft thanks, while others simply looked at her with expressions of respect. She accepted each gesture with a calm grace, her own heart full of quiet pride. She had done what she'd been trained to do. Yes, but she'd also shown people that skill and dedication could come from anyone, anywhere. For Trevor, each step toward the exit was filled with reflection. He realized that this wasn't just about apologizing to Elise or thanking her. This experience forced him to confront a larger issue, to think about how his judgments and assumptions affected others, not just on this flight, but in his entire life. He thought about his own workplace, his social circles, and even his family. How many times had he unconsciously written people off, assuming he already understood them without bothering to look deeper? As they reached the terminal, Trevor hesitated, then turned to Elise one last time. "Dr. Johnson," he began, his voice laced with a new humility. "I know I've said this already, but I want you to know, I'm not just grateful for what you did today. I'm grateful for the lesson you taught me too." Elise smiled, nodding thoughtfully. "Sometimes life gives us lessons in ways we don't expect," she replied gently. "But what really matters is what you choose to do with those lessons after." Trevor nodded, her words resonating deeply with him. He knew that the real challenge was only beginning. He would have to actively work to change his perspective, let go of his assumptions, and learn to see people for who they truly were. And that wasn't an easy task. It would take time, effort, and a willingness to be honest with himself. As they walked through the terminal, Elise felt a lightness in her step. Despite the unexpected events of the flight, there was a sense of fulfillment she hadn't anticipated. This journey had allowed her to showcase her skills and share a deeper lesson, one that she hoped would inspire not just Trevor, but anyone who witnessed it. For Elise, the significance of these small moments was clear. She knew that society didn't change overnight. It shifted gradually, through countless interactions, countless small acts of courage and understanding. She had faced prejudice countless times, and she knew she would face it again. But if one man could begin to question his assumptions, if he could carry this lesson forward and inspire others to do the same, then perhaps the change was possible, even if it came one person at a time. She glanced back at Trevor as they parted ways, each of them heading toward different destinations. In his eyes, she saw a glimmer of something that hadn't been there before, a hint of respect, of self-reflection, of a man who had come face to face with his own biases and was ready to start unlearning them. That was the beginning, and Elise knew that even small beginnings had the power to create lasting change. As she continued through the terminal, her thoughts drifted back to the countless people she'd encountered throughout her career, the patients who had trusted her with their lives, the colleagues who had become like family, and even the strangers who, like Trevor, had come into her life briefly, but left with a deeper understanding. Each interaction reminded her of why she'd chosen this path, and why she'd fought so hard to reach this point. Elise knew she'd face challenges in the future. Moments when she would once again be questioned or doubted. But today had strengthened her resolve, reaffirming her belief that her worth wasn't defined by others' perceptions. She had proven her skills, her dedication, and her strength to herself countless times, and that was all the validation she needed. As she reached the baggage claim area, Elise found herself smiling, a small, genuine smile of satisfaction. This trip had already proven more meaningful than she had anticipated, a reminder of the resilience that lay within her and the quiet, unspoken impact she could have on others. Before she left the terminal, she felt a gentle tap on her shoulder. Turning around, she saw one of the flight attendants from the plane, a young woman with an expression of gratitude and admiration. "Dr. Johnson," the flight attendant said softly, "I just wanted to say thank you. Watching you handle everything today, seeing the way you kept everyone calm, it really made a difference." Elise gave her a warm smile. "Thank you," she replied. "It's what I'm here for." The flight attendant nodded, her eyes glistening slightly. "It's inspiring, really. I think everyone on that flight will remember today. I know I will." They exchanged a small nod of understanding, and with that, the flight attendant walked away, leaving Elise with a renewed sense of purpose. She felt a deep gratitude for the life she had built, for the strength that had carried her through each challenge, and for the chance to make a difference, even in unexpected places. As she stepped outside and breathed in the warm Miami air, Elise felt a calm certainty settle over her. She didn't need validation from anyone, not Trevor, not the other passengers, not even society. She had proven herself time and time again, not just to the world, but to herself. With quiet confidence, she moved forward, ready to embrace whatever challenges and lessons the future would hold. She knew her journey was far from over, but for now, she had a sense of peace, a sense that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The following days in Miami offered Elise the break she hadn't realized she needed. She let herself unwind, embracing the warmth of the sun, the gentle ocean breeze, and the rhythm of a city that felt like a world away from the demands of her trauma center in New York. Each morning, she would find a quiet spot on the beach where she could let her thoughts drift freely. Yet every so often, her mind would wander back to that flight. Trevor's humbled expression, the gratitude of the other passengers, the quiet nods of respect from the flight crew. It had been a moment of unexpected clarity, one that had reminded her of the barriers she had overcome and the impact she could have by simply living her truth. Elise realized that her journey was about more than saving lives. It was about changing perceptions and breaking down the assumptions that too often divided people. On her third day in Miami, as she sipped coffee at a small cafe overlooking the ocean, she received a message from her hospital back in New York. It was an email from Dr. Kate Weller, her mentor and one of the senior surgeons who had supported her since the start of her career. Elise smiled as she read the subject line, "Proud of you, Dr. Johnson." Opening the email, she found a warm note from Dr. Weller, who had apparently heard about the incident on the plane from one of the flight attendants. "Elise, I've always known you were destined for great things, but seeing how you handled that situation only reaffirms what I already knew. You're not just a talented surgeon, you're a leader, someone who others can look up to and trust in a crisis. Remember that," the email read. Elise felt a swell of pride. She had spent years trying to live up to the high expectations set for her, not just by others, but by herself. And reading Dr. Weller's words, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just a career. It was a calling, one that had taught her resilience, patience, and the strength to rise above any prejudice or doubt. As she finished reading, her thoughts drifted back to Trevor. She wondered if he had returned to his life with a changed perspective, or if he had already slipped back into old habits. She knew she couldn't control whether others learned from their experiences, but a part of her hoped that her words had left a lasting mark on him. Her reflections were interrupted by the soft ping of another message. This time it was from an unknown number. Curiously, she opened it, and her eyebrows raised as she saw the name at the end of the message. Trevor Whitman. "Elise," the message began. "I hope you don't mind me reaching out. I got your contact info from a friend in the aviation industry. I wanted to thank you again, not just for what you did on the plane, but for the perspective you gave me. Since that flight, I've thought a lot about our conversation, and I realize there's so much I've overlooked in my life. I'm reaching out to let you know I'm trying to do better, to make real changes in how I see the world and treat others." Elise felt a flicker of surprise. She hadn't expected to hear from him again, but as she read the rest of his message, she saw a glimpse of sincerity. Trevor went on to explain that he'd been reading about implicit biases, working on his own self-awareness, and even sharing his experience with his close friends and colleagues, encouraging them to reflect on their own assumptions. "I know it's just a start," he wrote, "but I wanted you to know that your words made a difference. You taught me something I didn't even know I needed to learn. Thank you for that." A small smile crept onto Elise's face. She hadn't sought validation from Trevor, nor had she expected an apology beyond their exchange on the plane. Yet knowing that he was making an effort, that he was taking steps, however small, to change his worldview, felt like a victory. It reminded her that real change often started in quiet moments, in the conversations that people carried with them long after they'd ended. She replied with a simple message. "Thank you for reaching out, Trevor. Change takes time, but it sounds like you're on the right path. Keep pushing yourself, and remember that growth is a lifelong journey. Take care." As she put down her phone, Elise felt a profound sense of peace. She had taken a stand, made her voice heard, and in doing so, she had sown a seed of growth in someone who hadn't realized he needed it. In her profession, success was often measured in lives saved, surgeries completed, and medical breakthroughs achieved. But moments like these reminded her that success could also be found in the way she inspired others, in the small shifts that collectively built a more understanding world. The rest of her trip to Miami became a time of quiet reflection and renewal. She knew that her work, her fight against prejudice, and her commitment to excellence were far from over. There would be other challenges, other encounters with people who doubted her place. But now, more than ever, she felt grounded in her purpose, more certain of her path than ever before. By the time Elise boarded her return flight to New York, she was ready for whatever awaited her next. This journey had given her more than just rest, it had given her a renewed sense of self. A reminder that strength wasn't just about skill, but about resilience, about the courage to stand firm in the face of doubt and inspire others along the way. On her return flight to New York, Elise felt an unusual calm. As she settled into her seat, she reflected on how much this brief trip had given her. Rest, a renewed sense of purpose, and a reminder that her work was as much about connecting with others as it was about medicine. She knew that once she landed, her demanding job would sweep her back into its familiar pace. But for the first time in a while, she felt truly ready, grounded in the knowledge that her journey went beyond the hospital walls. As the plane began its ascent, Elise took a deep breath and glanced around. A sense of calm washed over her as she noted the ordinary details of the flight, the quiet murmur of passengers, the flight attendants making their rounds. Just a few days ago, this same setting had turned into an unexpected test of her resilience and skill. But today, it simply felt like the beginning of another chapter. Elise pulled out her journal, something she'd started keeping during medical school to help her process the intensity of her journey. She hadn't had time to write in months, but this trip had reignited her habit of putting her thoughts down on paper. As she flipped to a blank page, her mind returned to Trevor's message from earlier. She began to write, letting the words flow freely. Sometimes, life puts us in situations where we must stand our ground, where our very presence challenges the assumptions people hold. I didn't choose to become a surgeon to prove myself to anyone, but it's these moments that remind me why I chose to push forward despite the obstacles. There is power in showing the world who you are, even when others don't expect it. The words felt liberating, a reminder of the quiet strength she carried with her. She knew she wasn't just writing for herself. This journal had become a record of her journey, something she might one day share with young women like herself, those who felt underestimated, who faced obstacles simply for daring to chase their dreams. As she continued writing, the gentle hum of the plane around her seemed to fade. replaced by memories of her early years. She thought of her mother, who had worked 2 jobs to support the family, and her father, who had always reminded her that she was just as capable as anyone else. Those early lessons had shaped her, grounding her in the knowledge that her worth was intrinsic, that she didn't need anyone's permission to take up space in this world. Elise paused, her pen hovering over the page. Her thoughts drifted back to her mentors, like Dr. Weller, who had seen her potential long before she'd fully recognized it herself. Each of them had left a mark on her journey, guiding her through the struggles and reminding her of her strength. And now she realized she was in a position to do the same for others, to serve not only as a surgeon, but as an example of what resilience and determination could achieve. Closing her journal, Elise gazed out the window, watching the clouds drift by in the endless blue sky. She knew that her life would continue to be filled with challenges. There would be other Trevor Whitman, other people who would judge her before they knew her. But she also knew that each encounter was an opportunity, not only to show them her strength, but to challenge their assumptions and perhaps plant a seed of growth, just as she had done on that flight. As the plane descended toward New York, she felt the familiar anticipation of returning to her patients, her team, and her role as a healer. But this time, she carried something more with her, a renewed clarity about her purpose and an unwavering commitment to continue her journey with integrity. Once the plane touched down and Elise walked into the bustling airport, she felt a sense of homecoming. The city's energy, with its unique blend of chaos and purpose, felt like an extension of herself. She had built her career here, and despite the challenges she faced daily, she loved her work, loved the people she served, and loved the city that had been both a teacher and a test of her resilience. As she left the airport, her phone buzzed with messages from her colleagues, welcoming her back and updating her on the cases awaiting her attention. She smiled, knowing she'd jump back in with renewed vigor. By the time she arrived at the hospital the next morning, she was ready to tackle whatever awaited her. Her first day back was intense, filled with back-to-back surgeries, patient consultations, and rounds with her team. But each moment reminded her of why she had chosen this path. The trust her patients placed in her, the respect of her colleagues, and the satisfaction of making a tangible difference reaffirmed her purpose. At the end of her shift, Elise stood by the hospital's large windows, looking out over the city she had come to love. The skyline was illuminated against the darkening sky, a reminder of the relentless pace of life here. She thought back to her journey, the barriers she'd overcome, and the countless moments of quiet strength that had brought her to this point. With a small, confident smile, Elise turned back toward the hallway. There would always be obstacles, always be judgments and biases to overcome, but she felt more certain than ever that she was exactly where she belonged. This was her calling, her passion, and her purpose, and she would continue to pursue it with the same resilience, grace, and strength that had defined her journey so far. Bookmark. Go back. As Elise settled back into her routine, her days blurred together in a steady stream of patient consultations, intense surgeries, and moments spent mentoring young residents who looked up to her with a mix of awe and admiration. Yet, no matter how busy she became, her experience on that flight lingered in her mind, reshaping the way she approached both her work and her interactions with others. One afternoon, while finishing her rounds, she noticed a familiar figure in the waiting room, a tall man with a cautious expression, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. It was Trevor Whitman. Surprised but curious, Elise walked over, her professional composure intact, though she couldn't help but feel a flicker of intrigue. "Trevor," she greeted him, her tone polite but guarded. "This is unexpected. What brings you here?" Trevor smiled a little nervously. "Dr. Johnson, I know this might seem strange. I don't mean to intrude, but I felt I owed you a proper thank you, and I wanted to share something with you." He handed her the flowers, which Elise accepted with a mixture of surprise and grace. She motioned for him to join her in a quieter corner of the waiting room. As they sat down, Trevor seemed hesitant, gathering his thoughts before he spoke. "I wasn't entirely honest with you on the plane," he admitted, looking down at his hands. "I mean, about my reaction to you. You see, I come from a background where people look like me think like me, and share the same circles. That flight, and meeting you, made me realize just how narrow my perspective had become. I've been doing some reflecting since then, trying to see beyond those old views. Elise listened, her expression patient but attentive. She could tell he had more to say, so she waited, allowing him the space to put his thoughts into words. After our flight, I couldn't shake what you said about assumptions, about the judgments people make without really knowing each other, Trevor continued, his voice softening. I realize that I've been part of that. Not intentionally, maybe, but by just going along with things, by not questioning my own biases, I'd become blind to the ways I treated people. He took a deep breath, visibly relieved to get the words out. Since then, I've taken steps to change that. I started volunteering with a youth mentorship program. I wanted to do something meaningful, something that would help me connect with people I never would have crossed paths with otherwise. And honestly, it's been the most eye-opening experience of my life. Elise felt a warmth spread through her chest as she listened. She had hoped her words would make an impact, but to hear how deeply Trevor had taken them to heart was truly moving. That's amazing, Trevor, she replied, her voice filled with genuine appreciation. Taking those steps isn't easy. It takes courage to look inward and to choose to grow. He nodded, a humble smile crossing his face. I don't expect to be perfect, he said, a hint of self-awareness in his tone. But I wanted you to know that I'm trying. That conversation we had, it changed something in me. And now, every time I catch myself making an assumption or falling back into an old habit, I remember what you told me. Elise was quiet for a moment, taking in the full weight of his words. She realized that the change he was describing wasn't just surface level. It was deep, a real shift in his outlook. And that, she knew, was a rare and precious thing. Change is a process, she said gently, meeting his gaze. It's not about being perfect. It's about being aware and making the choice to be better, one step at a time. What you're doing, it matters. And I'm glad that conversation we had helped spark it. Trevor seemed visibly relieved by her response, as though her acceptance of his efforts was something he hadn't realized he needed. Thank you, Dr. Johnson, he said, his voice filled with gratitude. You've changed the way I see the world, and I'll keep doing my best to live up to that. With a final nod of respect, Trevor rose to his feet, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Elise stood as well, a small, proud smile crossing her face. Take care, Trevor, and remember, growth is a lifelong journey. As Trevor left, Elise found herself reflecting on the power of a single conversation. She'd spent her career saving lives in the operating room, but this experience had reminded her that healing could take many forms. Sometimes the most profound changes were sparked by the smallest moments, by simply challenging someone's perception, by planting a seed of empathy. Later that evening, as she prepared to head home, Elise passed by a group of young medical students gathered in the hallway, deep in discussion about a recent lecture. She paused, watching them for a moment, remembering her own early days in the field. She thought about how much these students had yet to learn, not just about medicine, but about life, about resilience, about challenging the assumptions of those around them. She approached them, and they turned visibly excited to see her. One of the students asked eagerly, Dr. Johnson, do you have any advice for us about what it takes to make it in this field? Elise smiled, her answer coming naturally. Yes, she replied. Remember that medicine isn't just about knowledge or skill. It's about connection. You'll have moments where you'll need to stand your ground, to believe in yourself even when others might doubt you. And remember to always look beyond what you see on the surface. Every patient, every person you meet has a story that goes far deeper than you might realize. As she walked away, Elise felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing that her words, her journey, and her presence could serve as a guide to those following in her footsteps. Her purpose had grown beyond her work. She was creating a legacy of compassion, resilience, and open-mindedness that would live on through the lives she touched. Bookmark. The days that followed brought Elise back to the usual pace of her hospital life, high-stakes surgeries, intense consultations, and moments that required every ounce of her focus and energy. Yet, beneath the hustle, there was a steady sense of calm and purpose that hadn't been there before. The encounter with Trevor and the heartfelt responses of her colleagues and patients alike had reminded her of the broader impact she was having, even beyond her medical expertise. One evening, as she was finishing up her rounds, she noticed a small group gathered outside one of the patient rooms. Curious, she approached and saw that her colleague, Dr. Ahmed, was speaking with a family who looked anxious, their eyes filled with worry. Dr. Ahmed caught Elise's gaze and motioned her over, clearly relieved to see her. "Elise," he said softly, "this is the Jackson family. Their son just came out of surgery, and I think they could use a little extra reassurance." Elise nodded, her face softening as she turned to the family. She knew all too well that the moments after a loved one's surgery could feel like an eternity, every second filled with anxiety. She introduced herself gently, then explained the details of the procedure, outlining how the surgery had gone and what to expect during recovery. As she spoke, she could see the relief settling into the family's expressions. The mother, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes, let out a small sigh, her shoulders relaxing as she took Elise's hand in her own. "Thank you, Dr. Johnson," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I was so afraid I didn't know if he would make it." Elise squeezed her hand gently. "Your son is strong, and he's in good hands. We'll be monitoring him closely to make sure he heals well. I know it's a lot to take in, but we're here to support you every step of the way." The mother nodded, her eyes brimming with gratitude. Elise's calm and compassionate presence seemed to ease the family's worries in a way that few other things could. At that moment, Elise felt the same sense of fulfillment that had carried her through her recent experiences. She was reminded, once again, that her work wasn't just about the technicalities of medicine. It was about making people feel seen, understood, and supported. As she continued through the hospital that night, Elise found herself reflecting on her journey. She thought about how far she'd come since her early days in medical school, filled with determination, but burdened by the countless obstacles placed before her. She had broken through barriers, faced prejudice, and risen to every challenge thrown her way. Yet, despite all the hardships, her commitment to her work and her patients had never wavered. Her reflections were interrupted by a message notification on her phone. She opened it to find a message from Dr. Weller, her mentor. It was a brief note, but one that brought a smile to her face. "Elise, I've been hearing wonderful things about you lately. You're making a difference, not just as a surgeon, but as a leader. Keep it up. I couldn't be prouder." The words filled her with a renewed sense of pride. Dr. Weller's support had been instrumental in her early career, and knowing that her mentor still believed in her was a reminder of the importance of those who had supported her along the way. Elise knew that her journey wasn't hers alone. It was built on the encouragement, guidance, and faith of others who had seen her potential and helped her grow. The following day, Elise was invited to speak at a local medical conference where she was asked to share her experiences as a young trauma surgeon. The invitation surprised her, but she accepted, feeling it was the right moment to share her story. When the day of the conference arrived, Elise stood before a room filled with aspiring medical students, doctors, and professionals from across the field. She felt a slight nervousness, but as she looked out at the attentive faces, she realized she had an opportunity to speak her truth, to share not only her expertise, but also her journey of resilience. She began her talk with a story that many in the audience didn't expect, the experience she'd had on the flight to Miami. She spoke openly about the challenges she faced, the judgments she'd overcome, and the importance of resilience in her journey. "I didn't choose this path expecting it to be easy," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I knew I'd face obstacles, that people would doubt me because of things I couldn't change. But I also knew that my purpose went beyond their assumptions. And I want each of you to remember this. Success is about more than skill. It's about heart, about courage, and about the strength to stand firm in who you are." As she spoke, she noticed heads nodding, expressions of recognition, and even a few misty eyes. It became clear to Elise that her story was resonating in ways she hadn't expected. She closed with a final message. "Every one of you has a unique journey ahead. There will be challenges and moments of doubt, but know that the strength you carry inside is more powerful than any obstacle. Don't let anyone define your worth or tell you where you belong. Show them by living your truth. As she stepped away from the podium, the room erupted in applause, a wave of support and admiration that warmed her heart. In that moment, Elise felt a deep sense of connection with her audience, as though she'd shared something profoundly personal yet universally understood. Leaving the conference, Elise felt more empowered than ever. Her journey, with its ups and downs, had given her a sense of purpose that went beyond any title or accolade. She was here to heal, to inspire, and to pave the way for others. As she looked toward the future, Elise knew she would continue to face whatever challenges came her way with grace, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to making a difference. One life, one conversation, and one moment at a time. Bookmark. In the weeks following the conference, Elise found herself reconnecting with her purpose in new and unexpected ways. She'd always known that being a surgeon was about more than just treating injuries or performing complex surgeries. It was about building trust, breaking down barriers, and helping others see the humanity in one another. One late night, Elise was preparing to leave the hospital after a long shift when she noticed a young woman sitting alone in the waiting area. The woman looked nervous, her hands fidgeting as she stared down at her lap. Elise recognized that look instantly. The worry, the isolation, the feeling of being out of place. Something in her told Elise to go over. "Hi there," Elise said warmly as she approached. "Is everything all right? Do you need any help?" The woman looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of relief and surprise. "Oh, hi, doctor. I just needed a moment. My younger brother was admitted earlier, and, well, I'm not sure what happens next." Elise nodded understandingly. "Waiting can be the hardest part," she said. "Would you like to talk about what's going on?" The woman hesitated, but Elise's genuine presence seemed to reassure her. She introduced herself as Maya and explained that her brother had been in a car accident and was now stable but in recovery. As they talked, Elise learned that Maya had been the one supporting her family, juggling school and work to help pay for her brother's medical expenses. The weight of responsibility was visible on her young face. "What you're doing for your family, for your brother, takes a lot of strength," Elise said, admiring her resilience. "If you ever need guidance or just someone to talk to, know that you're not alone. There are people here who can help." Maya's expression softened, and Elise could see a spark of hope in her eyes. "Thank you, Dr. Johnson," she said quietly. "It means a lot to hear that." Elise gave her a reassuring smile, and they exchanged contact information so Maya could reach out if she needed support. As Elise walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that Maya's story was one of countless others, stories of people facing extraordinary challenges and needing just a small reminder that someone cared. It reminded Elise of her own struggles, her own journey through med school, and the mentors who had been there for her when she needed them most. Later that night, back in her apartment, Elise reflected on the role she was now beginning to play in other people's lives. She wasn't just a trauma surgeon anymore. She had become a source of guidance and hope, a figure that young people, especially young women of color, could look up to and know that their dreams were possible. It was then that an idea began to take root in her mind. What if she could create something lasting, something that would continue to support people like Maya, like herself? A mentorship program, perhaps. A network that would help young people facing similar struggles find guidance and resources to navigate their lives and careers. She could use her platform, her experiences, and her connections to empower others, just as Dr. Weller and other mentors had done for her. Over the next few days, Elise couldn't shake the excitement she felt about this idea. She reached out to Dr. Weller and a few other colleagues, sharing her vision for a program that would connect young people from underrepresented backgrounds with mentors in the medical field and beyond. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Her colleagues recognized the value of what she was proposing, and many offered to help bring it to life. Elise decided to call the program Beyond the White Coat, a name that captured her belief that success in medicine or any field was about more than just technical skills. It was about resilience, compassion, and the willingness to support others along the way. She envisioned workshops, seminars, one-on-one mentoring sessions, and even scholarships to help cover expenses for those in need. The program launched quietly but grew quickly, with mentors from various fields signing on to support Elise's vision. The participants included high school and college students, as well as young professionals who were eager to make a difference but lacked guidance and resources. A few months after the launch, Elise organized the first Beyond the White Coat seminar, held in a community center in Harlem, the same neighborhood where she had grown up. She remembered walking these streets as a young girl, dreaming of one day becoming a doctor, and now here she was, back where it all began, this time as a mentor and a leader. At the seminar, she spoke to a packed room of young people, sharing her story, the struggles she had overcome, and the power of believing in oneself, even when the odds seemed stacked against you. Her message was clear. No matter where you start, you can reach your goals with determination, courage, and the right support. Afterward, she spent time speaking with each attendee, listening to their stories, and offering encouragement. Many of them reminded her of herself at different stages of her journey, uncertain but hopeful, ambitious yet sometimes questioning their path. And each time she looked into their eyes, she felt a surge of pride and joy, knowing that she was helping them see a future where they too could break barriers. As the evening came to a close, Elise felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. She realized that Beyond the White Coat was more than just a program. It was a way for her to leave a legacy, inspire future generations, and give back to the community that had shaped her. It was a continuation of her story, a ripple effect of resilience and determination that she hoped would continue long after she'd left the hospital halls. As she locked up the center and stepped out into the cool night air, Elise took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her purpose settle over her like a warm blanket. Her journey had been filled with obstacles, but she had turned each one into a stepping stone, and now she was helping others do the same, guiding them along a path she knew all too well. In the weeks following the seminar, Beyond the White Coat gained momentum, drawing the attention of professionals and students alike from around the city. Elise's colleagues at the hospital rallied around her, offering their time, expertise, and even resources to help build the mentorship network. She watched in amazement as doctors, nurses, social workers, and even business professionals joined her mission, each one bringing unique insights and experiences to share with the next generation. Elise found herself juggling her roles as a trauma surgeon and a mentor, often arriving at the hospital early in the morning and leaving late at night. Her days were full, but the energy she gained from her new work was undeniable. She was connecting with young people on a personal level, hearing their hopes and fears and offering them guidance. In each interaction, she saw parts of herself, the girl who had once felt unsure of her place, fighting against every obstacle to make her dreams a reality. One evening, while running a small mentorship workshop, Elise noticed a teenage girl sitting off to the side, looking hesitant to join the group discussions. Elise's instincts kicked in, and during a break, she walked over to the young woman, introducing herself with a warm smile. "Hi, I'm Dr. Johnson. What's your name?" The girl looked up, startled, but managed a small smile. "I'm Tasha." "Nice to meet you, Tasha. Are you enjoying the workshop?" Elise asked, her tone gentle. Tasha nodded, though her expression remained guarded. "Yeah, it's just, I don't really know if this is for me," she said softly. "I don't think I could ever really be a doctor or anything like that." Elise sat down beside her, meeting her gaze with empathy. "I know that feeling," she said. "When I was your age, I felt the same way. I grew up not far from here, and there were times when I didn't think I'd ever make it to medical school. But one thing that helped me was knowing I didn't have to have all the answers right away. I just had to take the next step." Tasha's expression softened as Elise shared more of her story, describing the long nights of studying, the doubts, and the moments of triumph. She spoke of the people who had helped her along the way, from her family to her mentors, and how each one had left a mark on her journey. "You don't have to be sure about everything right now, Tasha," Elise continued. "All you need is to believe that your dreams are worth chasing, and if you ever need guidance or someone to talk to, we're here for you." Tasha's eyes brightened, a new spark of hope in her expression. Thank you, Dr. Johnson. I think I'd like to try. Elise nodded, her heart full. Moments like these reminded her of the importance of her work, not just as a surgeon, but as a mentor, a role model for young people who might not yet see their potential. Each conversation, each word of encouragement, was a step toward helping them believe in themselves. As Beyond the White Coat continued to grow, so did Elise's network of allies. Local organizations reached out, offering to partner with her program to provide educational resources, internships, and career opportunities. Schools in the area even started inviting her to speak, and Elise was often asked to share her story with students who might otherwise have never dreamed of careers in medicine or professional fields. One afternoon, Elise received a letter from Maya, the young woman she had met in the hospital waiting room not long ago. In the letter, Maya expressed her gratitude, explaining how Elise's encouragement had given her the confidence to apply to nursing school. She was now on her way to achieving her dream of working in healthcare, driven by her desire to help families like her own. The letter brought tears to Elise's eyes, filling her with a joy she hadn't anticipated. She was witnessing firsthand the impact of her mentorship, seeing lives transformed as young people found their own paths. Elise folded the letter and placed it on her desk, feeling a sense of pride that went beyond words. Beyond the White Coat was becoming everything she had envisioned. A force for change, a community of resilience and support. One evening, Dr. Weller called her, and they spoke at length about the program's success. "Elise," Dr. Weller said warmly, "you've built something truly remarkable. I always knew you'd make a difference, but what you're doing now is something special. You're creating a legacy." Elise felt a surge of gratitude, humbled by her mentor's words. "Thank you, Dr. Weller," she replied. "I wouldn't be here without people like you who believed in me, even when I didn't fully believe in myself." Dr. Weller chuckled. "That's the beauty of mentorship, Elise. It's a cycle. You received guidance, and now you're passing it on, helping others believe in themselves. I couldn't be prouder." After the call ended, Elise sat quietly, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She knew she still had much to accomplish, both in her medical career and through her program. But for the first time, she felt truly whole, as though every step, every challenge, every triumph had brought her to exactly where she was meant to be. Looking out at the city lights from her office window, Elise felt a profound sense of peace. She had built a life not just around her skills, but around her values, resilience, compassion, and the courage to lead by example. She knew her journey was far from over, and that there were still many lives to touch, many minds to inspire. With a steady heart and a renewed purpose, Elise was ready to continue her journey, knowing that each life she impacted would carry her legacy forward, creating a ripple effect that would live on long after she'd left the hospital halls. As the months passed, Beyond the White Coat flourished. Elise's vision had blossomed into a vibrant network, connecting young people with mentors across industries. The program was no longer limited to the medical field. It had expanded to include leaders in engineering, technology, law, and education, fields where many students from underrepresented backgrounds often struggled to find mentors. Each event brought new faces, new stories, and new moments of inspiration. Elise felt invigorated each time she saw a young person light up with possibility, as they realized that their dreams, too, were within reach. The network of mentors grew close-knit, becoming a support system not only for the students, but for each other as well. One evening, Elise hosted a gathering at the hospital auditorium to celebrate the program's one-year anniversary. It was a modest event, yet the energy in the room was palpable. Attendees included students from across the city, mentors, local community leaders, and even a few of Elise's colleagues who had helped her build the foundation of the program. As the event began, Elise took a moment to absorb the sight before her. It was a gathering of hope and progress, a testament to the resilience and ambition of each person who had joined Beyond the White Coat. When it was her turn to speak, she walked to the podium, the room settling into a respectful silence. Elise looked out over the crowd, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice steady yet filled with emotion. "A year ago this was just an idea. I wanted to give back to my community, to help young people believe in their dreams the way others helped me believe in mine. And seeing all of you here tonight, seeing the connections and friendships that have formed, it's more than I could have imagined." She took a breath, her eyes sweeping over the crowd. Beyond the White Coat isn't just about careers or success. It's about resilience, about breaking down barriers, and about proving that we all belong in the spaces we're willing to work for. Each one of you here tonight has a story, a journey, and a dream. And I want you to know that your dreams are valid, that they matter, and that this world needs your voices, your skills, and your passion. The crowd broke into applause, and Elise could see the pride in the faces of her colleagues and mentors who had supported her from the beginning. But she also noticed the tearful smiles of the students in the front rows, many of whom had come from backgrounds much like hers, fighting their own battles to rise above the challenges life had placed in their way. As the evening continued, several students shared their own experiences, speaking of the confidence they had gained, the guidance they'd received, and the encouragement they'd found through Beyond the White Coat. One by one, they spoke of how the program had helped them see new paths forward, paths they had once thought were out of reach. When it was Tasha's turn to speak, Elise felt a swell of pride. Tasha, the shy young woman she had spoken with at her first mentorship event, was now standing tall, her voice clear and steady as she shared her story. "I came here a year ago feeling like I didn't belong, like my dreams were too big," Tasha said, her voice wavering slightly. "But Dr. Johnson and the mentors here helped me believe in myself. They showed me that my background and my struggles didn't define me. They told me I was capable, and now I'm about to start my first semester in nursing school." A wave of applause erupted, and Elise's heart swelled with pride. She could see the confidence shining in Tasha's eyes, a young woman transformed by the power of mentorship and belief in her potential. As the event wound down, Elise was approached by a local journalist who had attended to cover the story of Beyond the White Coat. The journalist introduced herself, extending a hand with a warm smile. "Dr. Johnson, what you've created here is remarkable," the journalist said. "Would you mind if we ran a feature on Beyond the White Coat? I think it could inspire even more people to join or start similar programs." Elise felt a spark of excitement. The idea of expanding the reach of her program had crossed her mind, but this offer could amplify that vision in ways she hadn't anticipated. "That would be incredible," she replied, her voice filled with gratitude. "If this story can inspire others to give back, to mentor, and to support the next generation, I would be honored." They agreed to meet for an in-depth interview the following week, and as Elise walked away, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that her story, and the stories of all those involved in Beyond the White Coat, had the potential to create ripple effects, inspiring others to pay it forward. After the celebration ended and the attendees filtered out, Elise lingered in the auditorium, taking a quiet moment to reflect. She thought about the countless lives touched by the program, the connections made, and the bridges built. She knew her own journey had been transformed by the resilience she had developed through her struggles, and now she was witnessing that same resilience blossoming in others. Her phone buzzed with a new message, and she saw it was from Trevor Whitman. He had read about the event and wanted to express his admiration for what she'd accomplished. "Elise, I'm in awe of what you've built. Thank you for showing me what it means to truly make a difference. You've inspired me to do more in my own community. I hope our paths cross again soon." Elise smiled, feeling the quiet satisfaction of knowing that her work had inspired change, even in unexpected places. Trevor's message was a reminder of how one conversation, one moment of understanding, could lead to profound transformation. As she left the auditorium, Elise felt a powerful sense of fulfillment. Her journey had not only shaped her, but had paved the way for countless others. She was living proof that resilience, compassion, and purpose could create a legacy that stretched far beyond her own life. The lights of the city awaited her, and Elise walked toward them with confidence, knowing she was exactly where she was meant to be, making a difference, one life at a time. The feature on Beyond the White Coat was published the following month, and the response was overwhelming. Elise was moved by the outpouring of support from her hospital colleagues, former classmates, and even strangers from across the country who reached out to say how much her story had resonated with them. The article highlighted her journey, her dedication to breaking barriers, and her determination to lift others along the way. It captured the heart of her mission and showed readers the real impact of mentorship and compassion. Soon after, she received a call from a national education foundation, inviting her to a conference on mentoring and diversity in healthcare. They wanted her to speak about her journey and share insights on how Beyond the White Coat could serve as a model for similar programs across the country. The invitation felt surreal. Elise had never sought the spotlight. However, she knew that sharing her experiences could help others understand the power of mentorship and inspire them to create change in their own communities. She accepted, feeling a blend of excitement and responsibility. The conference was held in Washington, D.C., drawing healthcare leaders, educators, and policymakers from across the nation. As Elise stepped into the conference hall, she was struck by the magnitude of the event. Attendees from every corner of the medical field filled the room, their conversations buzzing with ideas and optimism. She realized that she was now part of a larger movement, one that aimed to bridge gaps, expand access, and make healthcare careers more attainable for everyone. When it was her turn to speak, Elise walked up to the podium with a calm, focused energy. She looked out over the audience, reminding herself that this wasn't just about her story. It was about all the young people she had met, the students who had found confidence through her program, and the mentors who had become allies in her mission. "Good morning," she began, her voice carrying through the room. "I want to thank you all for the work you're doing to make healthcare more inclusive and accessible. When I started Beyond the White Coat, it was because I remembered what it was like to walk into spaces where I felt out of place, where I felt I had to prove myself over and over again. My hope was to create a network where young people from every background could feel they belonged, where they could find mentors who believed in them even when they struggled to believe in themselves." She paused, letting her words settle over the crowd. "Mentorship is more than just guidance," she continued. "It's about building relationships that challenge and uplift, relationships that help people see their own potential and give them the confidence to pursue it. And that impact doesn't just stop with one generation. It creates a ripple effect, changing lives, communities, and ultimately the world." As she spoke, Elise shared the stories of some of the students she had worked with. Tasha, who was now thriving in nursing school, Maya, who had found her calling in healthcare, and the countless others whose lives had been shaped by the encouragement and belief of mentors. She saw people nodding, expressions of recognition on their faces as they absorbed the real impact mentorship could have. She concluded with a call to action. "I urge each of you to think about the people in your life who helped you get here, who believed in you when the path wasn't clear. Then ask yourselves how you can be that person for someone else. It starts with a single conversation, a simple offer of support, but the effects can last a lifetime." The room erupted into applause, and Elise felt a wave of pride and humility. She hadn't expected her story to resonate so deeply, yet the connection she felt with the audience was undeniable. As she stepped down from the podium, several attendees approached her, eager to learn more about Beyond the White Coat and how they could replicate its success in their own communities. Throughout the day, Elise networked with doctors, educators, and executives who wanted to partner with her program. Some proposed collaborations, others offered to host workshops, and a few even suggested expanding the program to include internships and job shadowing opportunities. It was clear that Beyond the White Coat had struck a chord, and Elise could see the potential for her vision to grow beyond her wildest dreams. As the conference ended, Elise felt inspired by the new possibilities ahead. She had come full circle, from a young woman navigating the uncertainties of medical school to a leader inspiring change on a national scale. Her journey was no longer just her own. It was woven into the journeys of those she had mentored and the communities she hoped to reach. Back in New York, Elise threw herself into expanding the program. she collaborated with organizations to create scholarships for students from underprivileged backgrounds, providing financial support so they could focus on their studies and ambitions. She also developed a series of online workshops and resources, making mentorship accessible to students outside of New York City. With each new edition, Beyond the White Coat became a stronger, more inclusive force for change. As months passed, Elise began to see the true impact of her work. Students who had once felt adrift were now flourishing, entering their chosen fields with confidence and determination. Many returned to volunteer as mentors, giving back to the community that had supported them. The network had become a cycle of resilience, with each generation lifting up the next, creating a legacy of support that stretched far beyond what Elise had originally envisioned. Late one night, after a long day at the hospital, Elise looked through emails from students and mentors, sharing their successes, their gratitude, and their hope for the future. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that Beyond the White Coat had become a movement of its own, a beacon of opportunity for those who needed it most. She thought back to her own journey, the obstacles she'd faced, and the people who had helped her find her way. In helping others, she had not only built a legacy, but had also discovered a deeper purpose. As she closed her laptop, Elise smiled, ready to continue her journey with the same resilience, compassion, and dedication that had guided her from the very beginning. With Beyond the White Coat flourishing beyond her initial hopes, Elise often found herself marveling at how her small idea had transformed into a nationwide network. The program had become a cornerstone of her life, as vital to her as her work in the hospital. Balancing both roles was demanding. Yet the fulfillment she gained from watching her mentees grow and flourish made every challenge worth it. One chilly evening, Elise was heading home after another packed day when her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Tasha, her once shy mentee, who was now nearing the end of her nursing program. Tasha's message was filled with excitement. She had been selected as a guest speaker at her college's career day, where she would share her journey and talk about her plans to work in pediatric nursing. Reading the message, Elise felt a swell of pride. Tasha had come so far from the quiet, uncertain girl she'd met at that first mentorship session. She remembered the conversations they'd shared, the advice Elise had given her about perseverance, resilience, and the importance of believing in herself. And now Tasha was paying it forward, ready to inspire others just as she had been inspired. When career day arrived, Tasha invited Elise to attend as her guest. Elise, touched by the gesture, happily accepted. She arrived at the college auditorium early and found a seat near the front. Watching the students file in, many with eager expressions and notebooks in hand, she felt a wave of nostalgia. She remembered her own days as a student, the uncertainty and excitement that came with each new step toward her goals. As Tasha took the stage, Elise noticed how composed she seemed. She exuded a quiet confidence, a calmness that radiated through the room as she began to speak. "Hi, everyone," Tasha started, her voice steady and warm. "I want to tell you a little bit about my journey and how I found the courage to pursue my dream of becoming a nurse. When I first started, I didn't think I had what it took. I doubted myself constantly, felt out of place, until I met a mentor who changed everything." She glanced toward Elise, a grateful smile lighting up her face. "Dr. Elise Johnson showed me that my dreams were possible. She taught me that resilience and heart are just as important as skill. And because of her, I stand here today, ready to make a difference in the lives of others." A round of applause erupted, and Elise felt her eyes well up with tears. She hadn't realized just how deeply she had impacted Tasha's life until this moment. As she listened to Tasha's story, Elise felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for her own journey, her mentors, and the incredible young people she had the privilege of guiding. After Tasha's speech, students came up to ask her questions, eager to learn more about her path and the role mentorship had played. Elise watched from the sidelines, feeling a profound sense of pride as she saw Tasha inspire her peers with her story. It was a moment that encapsulated everything Beyond the White Coat stood for: support, courage, and the transformative power of believing in oneself. Later that evening, Tasha and Elise shared a quiet dinner at a nearby cafe. Tasha was still glowing with excitement, her confidence shining through in every word. "Dr. Johnson, I just wanted to say thank you for everything," Tasha said, her voice filled with sincerity. "I never would have gotten here without you." Elise smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "Tasha, you're the one who did the work. You found your courage, your voice. All I did was remind you that it was already there." Tasha's face softened, and she nodded, clearly touched by Elise's words. "I just hope that one day I can help someone the way you helped me." "You will," Elise replied confidently. "You already are." As they parted ways, Elise reflected on the ripple effect of her work. She had set out to create a program that would help a handful of young people find their way, but it had grown into something far greater. Through Tasha, Maya, and so many others, the impact of Beyond the White Coat was expanding, reaching corners of the community Elise hadn't dreamed of when she first started. A few weeks later, Elise received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was an official invitation from the mayor's office, inviting her to a city council meeting where she would be recognized for her contributions to the community through Beyond the White Coat. The letter noted her work in fostering diversity, supporting underrepresented students, and empowering the next generation of professionals in New York City. The recognition was humbling, and Elise couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and disbelief. She had never expected her program to attract such attention, but as she read the letter, she felt validated in her mission. The acknowledgement from the city was a reminder of the impact she was making, a testament to the lives she had touched and the change she was creating. On the day of the city council meeting, Elise arrived at City Hall, accompanied by Dr. Weller, Tasha, and a few of her colleagues. As she stepped up to the podium to accept the recognition, she felt the eyes of the community on her, filled with admiration and respect. She took a deep breath, collecting her thoughts. "Thank you," she began, her voice carrying a sense of gratitude and pride. "This recognition means so much to me, but it truly belongs to everyone who has been a part of Beyond the White Coat, the mentors, the students, and the incredible people who've supported our mission. Together, we're building a future where everyone can feel they belong, where anyone can achieve their dreams." The audience erupted in applause, and Elise felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Her journey had brought her to a place she'd never anticipated, a place where her work and her passion aligned to create something lasting. As the applause faded, Elise realized that this was only the beginning. There were still so many lives to touch and so many dreams to nurture, and she was ready to continue her mission, knowing that each step forward would create a legacy far greater than she had ever imagined. Bookmark. After the city council meeting, Elise found herself reflecting on how far Beyond the White Coat had come. Yet, despite the recognition and the rapid growth of the program, she knew there was more work to do. Each success was a reminder of the countless young people still in need of support, still looking for someone to tell them that their dreams were possible. With this in mind, Elise decided to expand her program further. She reached out to her network, gathering professionals from various fields, not only in medicine, but in engineering, technology, law, and education. Her goal was to create a more comprehensive network of mentors that could provide guidance across diverse career paths, opening doors for students who otherwise might not have access to these opportunities. One afternoon, as Elise was working on the expansion plans, she received a call from the dean of her alma mater, Stanford Medical School. The dean had read about Beyond the White Coat and was impressed by how Elise had turned her vision into a powerful force for change. "Elise," the dean said warmly, "your work is inspiring. We'd love for you to come back to Stanford and share your experiences with our students. I think your story would resonate with them, and perhaps we can even discuss a partnership to bring Beyond the White Coat to campuses nationwide." The idea filled Elise with excitement. She had always dreamed of making a difference on a larger scale, and the thought of bringing her mentorship model to students across the country was exhilarating. She agreed immediately, and the dean arranged for her to visit in a few weeks. When the day arrived, Elise felt a rush of nostalgia as she walked through the familiar campus halls. Stanford had been the place where her dreams had taken shape, where she had worked tirelessly to prove herself in a world that wasn't always welcoming. And now, she was returning not as a student, but as a leader, ready to inspire the next generation. The auditorium was packed with medical students, professors, and faculty members, all eager to hear from an alumna who had carved out a unique path in both medicine and mentorship. As she stood at the podium, Elise took a deep breath, letting the familiar surroundings ground her. "I'm honored to be here," her voice steady yet filled with emotion. "This school shaped me in ways I didn't fully understand at the time. I came here driven by a dream, but I also faced doubt, both from myself and from others. There were times I questioned if I truly belonged, but every obstacle I faced strengthened my resolve, teaching me that resilience is just as important as skill." She paused, letting her words sink in. "And now, through Beyond the White Coat, I've had the privilege of helping others find that same resilience. Mentorship is a powerful thing. It changes lives and brings people together. When we reach out to support each other, we break down barriers and open doors. We create a world where everyone has the chance to succeed." The audience was rapt, hanging on to her every word. Elise continued, sharing stories of the young people she had mentored, the students who had found their confidence, and the mentors who had made a lasting difference. Her words painted a vivid picture of how mentorship could transform lives, both for those who received it and those who offered it. After her speech, the dean joined her on stage, a look of admiration on his face. "Elise, you've inspired us all today," he said. "Stanford would be proud to partner with Beyond the White Coat to extend this mission to campuses across the country. We'd love to help make your vision a national reality." The room broke into applause, and Elise felt her heart swell with gratitude and excitement. This partnership would bring her program to students who, like her, had once needed someone to believe in them, to guide them through the uncertainty of building a career. It was a chance to reach even more people, to inspire change on a scale she had only dreamed of. In the following months, Elise worked closely with Stanford and several other universities to establish Beyond the White Coat chapters across the country. These chapters would offer mentorship, workshops, and networking opportunities for students, regardless of their background or financial means. She enlisted leaders from various fields, bringing together a diverse and passionate group of mentors, ready to give back. The expansion brought fresh energy and countless success stories. Students who had once felt lost found their direction, their confidence growing with each new connection they made. The program had become a beacon of hope for those who might have given up, a reminder that there was a place for them in any field they chose to pursue. Elise also continued to work on new initiatives within the program, including internships, scholarships, and job shadowing opportunities that would give students practical experience in their chosen fields. She envisioned a future where Beyond the White Coat alumni would return as mentors, creating a cycle of support that would endure for generations. As the program continued to grow, Elise's impact became undeniable. She received messages from students and mentors alike, expressing their gratitude for the opportunities and community she had created. Each note, each story, was a reminder of the powerful difference one person could make when they dedicated themselves to a purpose greater than themselves. One evening, Elise received an email from Trevor Whitman. He had been following the success of Beyond the White Coat and wanted to extend his congratulations. "Elise," he wrote, "you've shown me what it truly means to create change. Watching what you've built has inspired me to start a mentorship program within my own company, focusing on diversity and inclusion. Thank you for being the example we all needed." Elise smiled as she read his words, realizing that her work was inspiring others to take up the cause in their own spheres. She had created a ripple effect, one that reached far beyond the students she worked with directly. At that moment, she knew her journey was only beginning. With each new step, she would continue to grow beyond the white coat, turning it into a movement that would touch countless lives and remind everyone that no dream was too big and no obstacle too great, if one was willing to reach out and help others along the way. In the end, Dr. Elise Johnson's journey on that flight was about far more than just a single act of heroism. It was a testament to how one person's courage and resilience can confront prejudice, inspiring both empathy and transformation. Elise's professionalism, compassion, and quiet strength didn't just save a life. They shattered assumptions, opened minds, and touched hearts in a way that resonated long after the plane landed. Throughout this story, we see how Elise, a highly skilled trauma surgeon, faces challenges not only in her demanding profession, but also in moments as mundane as a commercial flight. Her journey wasn't solely about proving her worth to others. It was about staying true to herself and to her calling, regardless of how others perceived her. Her ability to stay composed in the face of adversity, to rise above judgment, and to offer kindness even to those who doubted her, reminds us all of the power of compassion and inner strength. This story teaches us that, while prejudice and misunderstanding still exist, they can be countered with patience, professionalism, and dignity. We're reminded that real change doesn't always come from grand gestures, but rather from small moments of grace and the courage to address others with empathy, even when facing doubt or bias. Ultimately, it's a story about resilience and the ability to see past others' judgments, using each experience as an opportunity to inspire, educate, and grow. The takeaway? We all hold biases, often unconsciously, but it's within our power to confront and overcome them. Dr. Elise Johnson's example challenges us to do better, to look beyond appearances, and to appreciate the dedication and humanity of those around us. Just as her story inspired a single passenger to change his perspective, it serves as a call for each of us to reflect on our own beliefs and strive to be more compassionate. If you found this story impactful, comment with 1. If it moved you deeply, comment with 2. And if you have stories of your own about resilience, change, or breaking down barriers, please share them with us below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss any more inspiring stories like this one. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.